Real YouTubists hate Incineroar. Wait, what was the next line? Oh, I really hope it's not in the new games. There was something better, but the writing in this one is actually kind of nice. This is actually okay, kind of nice relative to to my norm, to the average. So I don't think it can be picked up. I think I've gotten too high quality a mic and it can't pick up my claps. Anyway, hello. Today we're talking about Incineroar and why I don't think it should be in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Basically, I just think that this is a really interesting issue to talk about. Maybe issue is the wrong word. I think it's a really interesting topic to discuss because I think that a lot of the nuances of what makes Incineroar so unhealthy, such a bad Pokemon for diversity in the game, and how it really limits team building and the amount of Pokemon that are viable, I think is something that is actually kind of complex and difficult to like. It's not super obvious, I think, because of the way that Incineroar interacts with the game. And so I thought that, maybe this is a good time to talk about why I don't want it in Scarlet and Violet and why it's been so oppressive since it was given Intimidate. So yeah, that's kind of my plan for today. Let's talk about Incineroar. So what is Incineroar? Incineroar is a fire and dark type. It's a starter Pokemon from Generation 7, and there's a couple things about it that make it extremely prevalent. The first is it has access to Intimidate, which I'm not going to say is the single best ability in VGC, but of abilities that are not like unique, like of commonplace abilities, it's far and away the best. The other abilities are so good that they basically take Pokemon that would never be used and make them actually viable. Shadow Tag Gothitelle comes to mind. I'm sure there's some other ones. And of course, there's some unique abilities like Intrepid Sword, but I'm not counting those because those are unique abilities. So of the commonplace abilities, it's far and away the best. Why? Well, the way that Intimidate works is every time you switch in, you reduce the opponent's damage output by about 66% of what it is, which is about it's like divide the power by 1.5 basically, which is a pretty big impact for physical attackers. This only applies to physical attackers, but it can be used multiple times throughout the battle. So you're basically cutting your opponent's damage output for all physical attackers, and you can do this multiple times throughout the battle. On top of that, Incineroar has really good natural bulk with 95 HP, 90 defense, and actually pretty good defensive typing. It only has 3 weaknesses to fire, rock. Oh, 4 weaknesses. Fighting, ground, rock, and water, with the first 3 all primarily being physical attacking types. Occasionally you'll have earth power, but most rock moves are physical, most fighting moves are physical, most ground moves, most commonplace ground moves are physical. And so because of that, it has even like, it basically reduces, it's almost like solid rock, but even better, right? And so it's very flexible with its itemization. It resists a fair number of important types. It's immune to Prankster, and it has good natural bulk. It has great stats across the board. It has 115 base attack, allowing it to do damage. Even like, it's not going to be OHKOing a lot of stuff, but it can actually output damage if you leave it alone. And 60 base speed actually puts it at a really nice speed tier for what it wants to do, which is, let's talk about the moves. So Incineroar has access to the move Fake Out, which for many years was considered one of the best moves. It was not the single best commonplace move in the game. With Dynamax, that fell off a bit. It's still incredibly, incredibly valuable. I cannot stress this enough. It's an amazing move. In Generation 7, Incineroar had access to the move U-Turn, which basically allowed you to switch Incineroar in or lead with it. Basically, if it's on the field, it would allow you to use U-Turn, do a little bit of damage to the opponent, but importantly, switch out after the opponent has already attacked, which is not... That's very valuable because what it allows you to do is bring in a Pokemon without having it take the attack. So you can use Incineroar's bulk and good defensive typing and Intimidate to sponge an attack and then switch in something frailer, such as, I don't know, Tapu Koko, and bring it in without risking it taking a ton of damage on the switch in because that's a frailer Pokemon. For whatever reason, in Generation 8, Incineroar received a pretty massive buff. In that they gave it arguably the best move that they could have, which is Parting Shot. Now, Parting Shot is similar to U-Turn in that after the user uses the move, it switches them out. However, Parting Shot also instead of doing damage, it's not a damaging move, it instead lowers both the attack and the special attack of the target. So now Incineroar not only has access to Intimidate, not only has access to Fake Out, not only can, basically, we refer to it as pivot into a frailer or more bulky or less bulky Pokemon without needing it to take damage. It can also lower the opponent's damage output with Parting Shot, which is a massive deal because it allows you to like not only bring in a Pokemon and have them avoid taking damage, but also like then make them weaker, like basically give your new Pokemon an even bigger advantage because you've lowered the opponent's damage output. And keep in mind, this is both the attack and the special attack stages, so it's guaranteed to make the target weaker, unlike Intimidate, which is like only physical attackers. So Incineroar has a lot going for it, and it has led to a ridiculously high usage rate. This was true in 2019 as well, the last competitive format that we played in real life, as well as right now. You can see this thing has 73% usage. So on 3/4 of all teams, Incineroar is there, and of teams that perform well, it's higher than this as well. Especially like at the World Championships, I think it's probably of the teams in the top 16. I would guess that Incineroar was on almost all of them, if not. I know it wasn't on all of them, but it was on a vast majority. So okay, Incineroar is very, very bulky, but the reason I think something that people don't always recognize about Incineroar is that it is not oppressive in an offensive sense. When people tend to think of overpowered Pokemon, they tend to think about Pokemon that are just going to blow through the opponent without easy counters. So thinking about Pokemon like Calyrex, both Shadow and Ice, Zacian, Kyogre, Groudon, these Pokemon with, Mega Rayquaza, Xerneas, Pokemon with incredibly high damage output. Landorus T also has high damage output. That's what people tend to think of. And I think part of the reason why people don't hate Incineroar as much as something like Zacian is because it's not as obvious what it's doing, because it's overwhelming defensively by shutting down the opponent rather than KOing them, and it just looks differently. You can see part of Incineroar's effect in the usage stats, by the way. All of the Pokemon at the top have like decent ways of handling it, right? So we have Incineroar at number 1. Zacian can OHKO it if it's frail and it's at +1, otherwise it's going to be 2-shotting it most of the time. Thundur's with Defiant, Kyogre with Water Spout. Grimmsnarl doesn't explicitly do well into it, but it doesn't like lose to it either. It can they both play defensive roles. Gastrodon, super effective damage into it, can yawn it. Not super good, but also not terrible. Whimsicott doesn't do anything. Charizard, huge damage to it with Max Airstream. Calyrex doesn't do anything. Groudon beats it. It's a lot of the top Pokemon you can see are trained with Incineroar. A lot of the top Pokemon in the meta have something they can do against Incineroar. Not all of them. I would say Calyrex, Shadow, not a great matchup. Whimsicott, not a great matchup. Rillaboom, not a great matchup. But a lot of the top Pokemon are only able to be used because they have tools against Incineroar, whether it's great tools or just okay tools. Everything in this metagame is played with Incineroar in mind because it is the most common Pokemon. Also, because it's not a restricted Pokemon, you like Zacian, for example. If Zacian were not restricted, maybe its usage would be higher. Honestly, I'm not positive. I mean, it's probably, yeah. If Zacian were a restricted Pokemon, it would almost certainly be at higher usage than Incineroar, but it is a restricted Pokemon, so it's there's an opportunity cost there that isn't present when it comes to a Pokemon like Incineroar. So I think the other thing worth noting about Incineroar is that it is super flexible. It's not a Pokemon that's committal in any sense. It works on, I would say, almost all styles of teams, because it is like the ultimate glue Pokemon. It gives you like it basically flushes, like significantly bolsters most teams' defenses just by adding Incineroar. So even a team that's super offensive, even a team like that, like you can see, you would imagine that, like, okay, well, having Incineroar might give them more, it would give them an option versus Trick Room, and you can take out the moves. You can run Taunt, or I don't think it actually gets Roar, but you can run Taunt to help versus Trick Room, and fake out, Parting Shot, Intimidate. These are all really useful tools at slowing down the pace of Trick Room, and it's even on an offensive team it can do that, but on a defensive or a bulky offense team, it has so many roles that it can fill. So basically, it does everything super well. It's super flexible. Like, it can be splashed onto any team. It's not a restricted Pokemon. But the real thing, I think, is that it invalidates, I would say, an overwhelming number of Pokemon just by being present in the game. I think it's actually one of the best ways to take a look at this is, we talked about how good Intimidate is, right? I told you, I think this is like the best non-limited ability in the game. And if we look at the other Intimidators, we see some decent Pokemon. We have Arcanine, similar bulk to Incineroar, but slightly worse. And doesn't have the dark typing, so it doesn't get all those benefits. Yeah, like totally solid mon, right? Gyarados actually top cut the World Championships. Okay stats, like has some things going for it, not super broken. Hitmontop, good supportive Pokemon, like okay stats. These are all totally solid Pokemon. Even Salamence had some success this season. Landorus obviously is very good. Crocodile is not that good, but has some use. Like, I feel like a lot of the Intimidate Pokemon, Scrafty comes to mind. Most of the Intimidate Pokemon feel like they are designed in a way that's balanced, in that because Intimidate is such a good ability, they're given a deficit somewhere. So Scrafty, for example, doesn't have the same offense as Incineroar, being 25 points weaker. It has more defense, but it doesn't have as good typing. It has a 4 times weakness. It does have Fake Out and Intimidate, though, but it doesn't have that parting shot. It doesn't have that U-turn. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, when's the last time you saw Scrafty? I'm guessing not for quite a while. And the thing is that I think a lot of these Intimidate Pokemon are actually like, without Incineroar in the metagame, and probably without Landorus as well, but even just without Incineroar, you could make a case for them, right? Like Arcanine, you could make a case for. Gyarados, I mean, did well on a team that was unusual, but you know, perhaps like could have had more success if there wasn't this option. Yeah. So basically, like, Incineroar is so much better. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Incineroar is so much better than the next best option that like it invalidates all of these Pokemon, which could be used like in its stead, like to fill a similar niche, right? Of like, Intimidate is so good, I want Intimidate on my team. Maybe Landorus is not as flexible, especially in a Dynamax format, so maybe I don't want Landorus on my team, but maybe Gyarados or Arcanine is better. Maybe I want a more defensive Pokemon, so I run Arcanine or Scrafty. These would all be options without Incineroar, and with Incineroar's presence, they're not even considered. And because of that, rather than spreading out like, okay, like I have this type of team, Arcanine fits. I have this type of team, Gyarados fits. I have this type of team, Salamence fits. Hitmontop, Scrafty, Landorus, right? Rather than spreading out the way that Intimidate is distributed across the format, it's all concentrated in Incineroar and a bit Landorus. That's just how things are. And the other thing worth noting about Incineroar is that not only does it invalidate all of its alternatives because it's so much better, like there's really no reason in most cases you'd want to use any of these Pokemon over Incineroar. There are niche cases. I'm not saying it's not possible. Again, the team David Kotesh got top 16 with at the World Championships had Gyarados and Landorus Therian without Incineroar. So there are use cases for it. Yeah, there are use cases for it, but they're few and far between, and they're really difficult to identify as well. Like it's pretty cut and dry that in most cases you're going to want Incineroar. So super strong, good, like invalidates all of its alternatives, but it also invalidates a lot of other Pokemon. It's not a coincidence that a lot of the Pokemon at the top of the usage stats have tools against Incineroar. I'm actually curious. Rillaboom's third most used move is High Horsepower, actually. Grassy Glide, Fake Out, and then over 80% of them have High Horsepower. This is in part to hit Zacian, but it's also in large part to hit Incineroar. Let's see. Like, in order to get a Pokemon that like really, like, if we go through this, Incineroar cancels out. We talked about Zacian, Thundurus, Kyogre, Grimm, Gastrodon. Whimsicott it doesn't beat Incineroar, but again, it's not that type of Pokemon. It's here to set Tailwind up, so it doesn't explicitly lose to it either. Charizard, Calyrex doesn't even do horrible against Incineroar because Astro Barrage does like a quarter of its health, so it can actually help chip with partner support. Groudon obviously beats it. High Horsepower. Regieleki KOs it with Mid-Life Orb, and even not it chunks it for huge damage. Amoonguss can put it to sleep. Landorus beats it. Calyrex Ice's most used items are Weakness Policy, and then I guess this is Series 12, yeah. Basically both Weakness Policy and White Herb, you have the ability to OHKO Incineroar in Dynamax, which is pretty valuable. Venusaur can put it to sleep, also has Earth Power. P2 doesn't, it actually, like, P2 is one of the Pokemon that doesn't really care about Incineroar because it runs Foul Play as its main attacking move, so it actually doesn't care about it. Zapdos can chunk it, Yveltal can chunk it, Tornadus can chunk it, Palkia beats it, Kartana can hit it for super effective damage, Indeedee redirects it so it doesn't, like, Indeedee shuts down Fake Out and also redirects Parting Shot, Lunala can OHKO it, right? Like, we're at 4%, we're down to Shedinja, we're down to 4% usage, and even here, Tapu Fini, Urshifu, Colossal, Blastoise, Eternatus, all of these Pokemon, even Umbreon can taunt and yawn it, right? Taunt, yawn. Like, almost all Pokemon that are even usable in the meta, we're at 2%. We're still running into Pokemon, like, beats it, or, like, you know, matches up well into it. Power Gem, you see, is the fourth most used move here. This is partially for Charizard, again, partially for Incineroar. Earth Power is the number 1 most used, actually, and that's also for Incineroar. Solgaleo, ground moves, and rock moves here. Yeah, we're down to less than 2% usage before we start seeing Pokemon who, like, more consistently can't really beat it, and even these Pokemon aren't horrible into it. Almost every Pokemon in this format has to have a way to deal with Incineroar. Like, you can't just be shut down by Incineroar, and when you look at this, what you're not seeing is that there are so many Pokemon that could be viable otherwise that Incineroar's presence just, like, doesn't allow for. Because it makes sense, right? Incineroar is going to be on 3/4 at, I think that this is an underestimate for what it's worth. I think that more than, oh, sorry, I should have zoomed in. I think that over 3/4 of teams that you will play against will have Incineroar, but let's call it 3/4. That means if you have a Pokemon that has a losing, like an actual losing matchup against Incineroar, in a broader context, right? Like Incineroar invalidates a lot of Pokemon because of Fake Out, Intimidate. A lot of frail Pokemon can't really handle it. A lot of physical attackers just can't handle their damage output being cut unless they're really, really strong or they have really good like coverage and move pool or boosting options. So that's a huge chunk of Pokemon that are just taken out of play. Because if you have a losing, if you can't bring a Pokemon into Incineroar, which is true of a lot of the field of potential Pokemon, then you're basically playing down a slot for 3/4 of your matchups. And all of the teams that players are preparing for, 95% plus of the teams that players at the top level are preparing for have Incineroar on them. So a lot of the teams that don't have Incineroar are some of the more weird offshoots, like the ones, and especially the ones that can make it work, are very unusual, unorthodox teams that are not standard by any means. So if you're preparing for the most common, if you're going from like most to least common in your preparation, all of those teams are going to have Incineroar. So you have to prepare. You should basically be prepared to play Incineroar every round, and there are players who will play Incineroar every single round at tournaments, and that's not uncommon at all. And so not only is it so strong, it's kind of a vicious cycle where because it is so strong, it's so flexible, it really has no downside to using it. Like it's not really easy to take advantage of. Even things like Defiant and Competitive can be mitigated against it. Like the thing is, because Incineroar is a defensive piece, not an offensive piece, you never, in most matchups, you don't rely on it. In a sense, like it's really nice to have. It can be really useful, but it's not going to be like for example, there's matchups where if you have Kyogre, you need to bring Kyogre. If you have Zacian, you need to bring Zacian. If you have Regieleki, you need to bring Regieleki because these are your offensive components. They're necessary for you to take out the opponent's team. But because Incineroar is providing defensive utility, that's not the case. Like you don't need Incineroar for damage. So although the support can be nice and is often really useful, it's not mandatory in the same way, and you don't need to bring it on the field either a lot of the time against these Pokemon that it matches up poorly into. So not saying that players don't have ways around it, not saying that it can't be beaten or whatever, but it's really oppressive. I think that's the best word that I can say it. It's really stifling for the game as a whole. And so for all of those reasons, I really hope that Incineroar doesn't make it into Scarlet and Violet. It has, I won't say ruined, but it has had it has had a really significant impact on the last two competitive formats that we've had, and it's had an impact on pretty much all of the other ones that we've had as well, where it's been legal and has Intimidate because it didn't initially get that. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal. It really shuts down a lot, and so I really hope that it doesn't make it into Scarlet and Violet, and I hope that you have a better understanding of why that is now, because again, I think it's not as obvious. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about Incineroar in general. Let me know if any of this was coherent and made sense to you. I'm curious to hear people's thoughts in general, especially people who maybe are less into VGC as I am. But yeah, let me know what you think, and thank you for watching, and yeah, I'll see you later. Bye bye.